Hey, friends, today we're going to talk about something that does not get said loud enough. What we actually lose when a relationship ends, whether it's a divorce, a breakup, or a slow unraveling of something that once gave your life shape. The grief that follows can feel overwhelming and honestly confusing. We're not just grieving a person, we're grieving identity, purpose, community, even the future we thought we were headed towards. Sometimes the worst part isn't the loneliness, it's not knowing who you are anymore without them. So today, let's name it. Let's talk about what really gets lost when love falls apart, how the process of healing starts by simply admitting the weight of that loss. And to join us, we welcome author Marcus Ferris. Thank you for joining us, Marcus.
Hey Todd, super stoked to be here today.
All right. Well, let's get to know let our audience get to know you first. You're in the business of helping people rebuild and repurpose. So can you fill us in a little bit on the trials that made you become an expert in this field?
Yeah, definitely. So I'll start with the end, which is that I currently work at for my full-time position company called Mission 22, which is a veteran nonprofit that effectively teaches how to do post-traumatic growth. So when somebody has gone through combat or has gone through a military experience that's left them, a good term would be morally injured, meaning I thought I had a way of understanding how people interact and how I interact with people, sort of like a personal philosophy of the world, if you will. And then it gets shattered in a very short amount of time. So as we grow up, when we're little, we need to know, like step by step, we need to learn how to kind of update our worldview. Sort of the map and the territory there's always going to be a little bit of a delta. But under normal circumstances, learning that is a sort of stepwise process. It's not traumatic where it all sort of happens at once. But then it can come to pass where certain life events occur where the way that you thought things were are so radically different from how they currently are that it leaves us morally injured. Not my term, but it was one that I found has been kind of helpful. So it's like, we throw around the word trauma a lot, and sometimes that can be misunderstood. Like, is the trauma of getting a laceration on the leg that I have to go to the ER for the same thing as a trauma of hearing news about, a betrayal or something like that? And so that's kind of where I'm at now. But my background was I was a engineer student at Auburn University, and I was an ROTC at that point. Went off to the Army for a couple of years, and they sent me up to Alaska, which is where I had met my first wife. And that was a time where in my early 20s I was having kind of a rough go of, where am I headed in life in terms of finding a mate? And having been at Auburn for like 4.5 years, I really had no luck, it would seem. And, it wasn't like I was that awkward. And, I didn't think I had some things going for me, right? Like I was going to the Army, I was like a pretty okay athlete and this and that. And things just didn't seem to, line up in that way. But then once I met this person there, like what I thought was like, oh, this is it, this is the thing. And then you start building your expectations and your planning for the future all happens sort of with this person involved. And then after I left Alaska, the things that had sort of supported that relationship in many ways that I took for granted went away. And eventually, that in like 2019 or so, is when that all sort of came crumbling down. And after finishing my active duty time, I was definitely in like this sort of limbo space, sort of wandering the wilderness. And there were a couple of key sort of aids in time of need that I had where I had several moments where it was like, if you've ever been to one of those candlelight services for Christmas Eve, where like they shut all the lights off and then it starts with just the one candle. And I had one of those moments that was extraordinarily salient in that journey where it was like, man, everything except this one thing seems to be falling apart. And it was kind of out of that one thing that I ended up where I am with Mission 22 now, with them coming up on, it'll be 6 years actually at the end of this year. So as kind of like on the side, if you will, I also, work with local people in terms of like coaching and sort of counseling. I went to school for both. And, I'm starting to see more and more, especially in the church, just the need for conversations where, a lot of people don't know how to even engage in this and get to a point where you can have a conversation with someone where afterward it's like, okay, that makes a little bit more sense.
Yeah.
It's one thing to like be with somebody and it's like, hey man, I don't know what you're going through, but I'm here, and that's
Yep.
a wonderful thing to have those types of people in your life. But then there, I had even somebody yesterday come to me and was like, hey, my life fell apart again, the wedding didn't happen, I need help. And like, okay, I'm here, I'm going to pat you on the head, I'm here for you. Okay, but what do I do? And so getting more and more specific on what others have done, hearing stories of like, how do people get through this other side? Everyone has sort of a unique, they have their idiosyncrasies of how it plays out, but there are also a lot of parallels and commonalities. And so, I think why conversations like this can be really helpful to see like, what did that person do and how can I apply it?
No, I love it. Well, I tell people all the time, back before I knew, when I was the guy who patted people on the head, it was like, oh, divorce. Something bad happened. Y'all decided to split. One of you is moving out. You're going to sign a sheet of paper, and then you're both meet somebody else and live happily ever after. Good luck. I did not really realize how layered divorce is, because there's what got you divorced, or all the things that got you divorced. There's the divorce, and then there's post divorce. And this to me is in that post divorce part of, like, you just don't have a death of a relationship. It is a death of a lot of different things, and you have to process that. And sort of what you just said, I steal the phrase all the time: thoughts disentangle themselves over the lips and through the fingertips. When you talk, when you write, these little emotions and thoughts that you have can land. And it's so good when you have people who've been through it. That's why I'm excited to talk to you, because you've thought about these things. And sometimes I have this discussion with people, they ponder it, but they're just pondering, they're just thinking about it, where I really appreciate how you really thought through the different, um, I hate using the word things, but get the different levels of what died. And
Mm-hmm.
so, can you talk a little bit about that? Like, when you sent me an email, and it had some really good points in there, but I'm gonna just look down real quick. Like, shared memories die,
Mm-hmm.
shared goals died. I think like sexual expression dies. Like, can you talk a little bit about those layers of the things that you're grieving, but you don't really know how to put a hat, where to put the hat on it?
Yeah, definitely. And I think, and especially within like the initial aftermath or sort of that like shock period, if you will, there's a desperation for the brain to like, I need some type of predictability. Like, understanding that one of the jobs of your biological brain is to create a future that reduces chaos and has some order and predictability, so you know what's coming next. But then, so I just watched the movie Warfare last night, and there are some scenes in that movie where, an audience member that's very invested, one of the things that they did was like, there was no soundtrack at all. And so you kind of have these little hints that they're about to be attacked, that they're getting surrounded on all sides, but you have no idea when or where. And you're just sort of like in this, fight, flight, or freeze, like, oh, what's going to happen? And then, out of nowhere, like a grenade just falls into your lap and like everything changes. And so, and that's sort of like my relationship's gone, what do I do? I think the first thing is to realize, like, your brain is doing its job to try to create predictability for the future, but it can't right now. Not really. Not when it comes to that most important relationship, or at least what was the most important relationship. So at first, it seems to me that the best way to approach it is to just grieve. Like, hey, you need to let go of trying to figure this out and to try to make sense of it, and simply grieve, because that's actually probably the most appropriate emotion. And so, well, what specifically do we grieve? Um, you know, uh, how to grieve is not really a thing that's easy to answer for everybody, right? You've heard of the models of grief, right? The denial, the bargaining, and all of that. They're all just models. They're like 4 different ones, and take them all with a grain of salt, because everyone grieves in a different way. But knowing what to grieve, we'll deal with the how later, but what to grieve can be beneficial. And so the first thing on so this is taken from a course that I made, if anybody's interested in checking out the full thing, but this is on a chapter called What is Lost. And the first one is a virtue domain. And this one might be more applicable to guys than ladies, but take it for what it's worth. A virtue domain, basically, imagine you have the Christian guy who's kind of doing the best that he can in his work. Things at home are kind of tough, but at least he has like that job that brings in money. He is a provider. He might hate the job, but he'll go back to the salt mines because he's providing. Like, it's where he can do his Christianity, if that makes sense.
Mhm.
It's an arena where he can practice, like, I'm going to like be self-sacrificial, I'm going to be Christ-like, I'm going to bear this burden of this job that I really don't like, which if you look at the statistics of how many people would change jobs if they could, it's like something like 80%.
Yeah.
And so when you're no longer having to provide for another person or having to provide for this family, it's like, no, where do I exercise my Christian virtue that I'm trying to develop? And so that can go away. And so I think that's, in the rebuilding process, which kind of maybe comes later, that might be something to consider of like, okay, your family or that spousal relationship is no longer a domain that's available for you to do your Christian walk. Where else can you do that?
Yeah.
Maybe you do need to quit the job. Maybe you need to find a different friend group or find somebody else who needs help, because giving help is the most often the best way to receive it.
Now, can I go there? Is this where purpose comes in? Meaning, I frequently talk about how when I was I did empty nesting and divorce at the same time, so I lost spouse and family. But it was nice to go to the grocery store, because going to the grocery store, I wasn't just shopping; I was buying my wife's favorite meal. I was buying my kid's favorite thing, and
Mhm,
that gave me purpose. And now I just shop for food.
mhm.
Is that part you're talking about, or is that something else?
Yeah, it's a little of both. So let's talk about that. So there's a difference between purpose and meaning. Purpose is I matter to something. Meaning means something matters to me. And so
Right.
it's a relationship that you have, really. So purpose and meaning are two ways of describing the directionality of a relationship that you have to something for you, something that's relevant to you, of all of the things that could be relevant to you in the world. And so when it's like, well, what matters to me anymore after this? If all of your mattering occurred within that relationship, well, shoot, like what's left? Um, how do I matter anymore? Am I simply matter, material? It's a funny little play on words here. Like,
Yep.
am I just material in this world that's just bumping around and, turning oxygen into carbon dioxide? Or do I matter to something? And so we can know that we matter to things and that we have purpose where we matter to them, when we have an arena. Like I love this idea of agent arena relationship, where it's kind of like if you feel like you would use the word absurd to describe where you are in life, that's when it's sort of like, imagine a tennis player in a football field. Like, what am I doing here? Like, the rule set that I thought that I lived my life by doesn't apply,
Uh huh.
and this feels absurd. And so being in that sort of limbo state of, oh, I thought we were playing football, and then all of a sudden I find myself with a racket in my hand. Oh no, the football doesn't mean anything to me. I don't have a team that I'm purposeful for. Like, so in that way of looking at it, I think it can be helpful to know that, like, if we look at it as like a virtue domain, we can find a different domain in which to exercise that, if that
Okay.
makes sense.
Yeah, it does. Okay. All right. That helps. All right. I derailed a little bit. So the first thing was virtue domain, and then I think I mentioned shared memory. Do you want to go into that?
Yeah, next one is like an external memory bank. And so this is one that when I came across it, it was like, oh yeah, of course it would work that way. So when two people share like a life very closely with one another, there's like, if you were to ask a guy and a girl, like, how did the date go? Like, the
Yeah.
girls can be like, oh, like there are all these like details that she'll bring up, and like, oh, he smiled at me at the door and he was wearing his, purple hoodie and blah blah blah, like all these little things. And then the guy will be like, yeah, it went pretty well, it was good. Or like, so detail versus like
Right.
bird's eye view. And so I think God designed men and women's brains to key in on different things purposefully, where generally speaking, men are like big picture, where's this going, let's like the strategic level. Women tend to be more focused on the tactical level, and that can make for a great, partnership. But then when that's gone, then your the sort of system of those two brains working together now is just a single brain. And you might take for granted, like, oh, I was relying on her, like, honey, when are we going to see the Smiths again, right? Like, it's, and then that's gone. And that's one of the things where it's like, oh, man, like, the you can't say anymore, hey, remember when? So you lose a person to say that to, for those particular memories, and that's something that can be rough to let go of.
No, that's 100% right. I still, even with my ex, every once in a while something will happen and we'll reach out to one another, and we have a cordial relationship. But we have memories that are only ours, and something else happens. She's like, "Hey, did you know so and so died?" or something like. No, I didn't. And she wouldn't have told me. But they're our friends. They're not my friend. They're not her
Mm-hmm.
friend. They're our friends. Or that's our memory, and it
Yep.
has no one else to share. No one else in the world she could share that with. And so every once in a while we just reach out because there's just some things that if you don't have that connection to that person anymore, those things are gone and you have no one to tell.
Hmm.
It's really funny you say that because I was literally today thinking about this. Men are very, logical, and we plan for the future, and women are way more empathetic, and it makes a great relationship. And when you pull out one, I think men can be men easier without women, and I think women have a hard time being women and men because they have to. This is a whole nother concept I've really been chewing on, but women have to take on a masculine role and keep their femininity. Men can just ignore the femininity, but we sure miss it because I think God wired us for both.
Hmm.
That's why we make great partners together. The other thing I want to say too about this, I'm fascinated by this about shared memory. Our first date, we both have memory of the restaurant, but my memory is seeing her, and what's behind her. Her memory is seeing me, and what's behind me. We have totally two separate
Hmm.
memories of the same thing. And that it's just an interesting concept, right? Sort of fits that.
Yeah, yeah, and the ability to sort of like outsource certain types of remembering goes away too.
Oh, that's right. That's right. That's right. Because you're saying you can't. What's so and so's name? Could you help me do? You have a partner, and it's really interesting when you were talking about that a minute ago. I was sort of thinking about sort of works with chores the same way. You have a life rhythm because oh, they're good at this and I'm good at this, and you'll go do that, and you just rely on your partner. And when that shared memory, those shared skills go away, you've lost all of that, and you have to reset, which is part of the numbing and the grieving, I suppose, you're talking about.
Hmm.
Okay, let's hit some more because we can go in the weeds of every one of these, which we very well may. Um, so that's past. What about future vision, future goals?
Yeah, we talked about how the brain is often a prediction machine, and how men, especially, are very concerned. Well, put a lot of their attention on like, hey, where's this going? What's the sort of bigger picture? And you start to build up. Let's see, how would we call it? So there's an idea here where, so the word is entropy. So entropy kind of describes the, like, when there's more entropy in the system, there's more like uncertainty. So for example, in the stock market, if you have a high entropy environment, it's much more volatile. People are more squirrely about how they invest. If there's less entropy, it means like I have a better idea of what's ahead, right? And so when it comes to future planning, we're kind of machines that want to reduce entropy in the future. Um,
Okay.
in the current cognitive science world, this is a area of intense study right now. There's a theory that basically says like that's the key job of the brain to distinguish. I'm distinguishing that from like your consciousness or mind, but your brain's activity is trying to reduce future entropy. And the more you can kind of plan, the more you can kind of project a vision into the future, the lower and lower that entropy starts to go. But then if all of a sudden, bam, like something happens that like, oh no, none of that is possible now. Like now you're in a very high entropy environment.
Hmm.
So what do you do? Like, how do you, and again, I think it's like when you get hit with this wave of uncertainty, grief is the first thing that we need to do. It's kind of like so I love this analogy where if I might be working with a coaching client who is maybe at the very beginning of the session, he or she is like oddly spun up emotionally in some way, and it's kind of like when clouds are covering the sun. And so what I'll relate is like, hey, the spiritual version of you that we're unfolding into all our lives is the blue sky, right?
Hmm.
God created you with that blue sky. Does the weather ever affect the blue sky? No, right?
Hmm.
So the truest version of yourself that God intended you to be is the sky. But like weather exists,
Right.
right? And so clearing the sky by processing some of those, like, also again, as men, like sometimes there's an emotion and it just displays as anger. It's sort
Yeah.
of the default emotion. It's sort of like anger is like fear's public mask. I've heard it said something like that. And so grieving is that healthiest way to clear out the, like, all of that fog that just got there from entropy. And then you can kind of start to see after a little bit like, okay, all right, now that's out of the system, at least in some ways. Man, there there was definitely a day I remember where it was almost, I won't say it was like my final day of grieving, but dude, like I didn't know that type of fluid could come out of my face. It was kind
Really.
of, but like after it, like that was the day where I fully accepted like, okay, this is not, like I have to accept, like the stages of grief thing, denial, there's a reason it's there. Um Coming to terms the word coming to terms is kind of interesting, right? Like, what are the new terms of your future? It does not include that person, not really, not
Yeah.
in the way it used to. And so, coming to terms is like, okay, these are the terms, and I accept them. It's out of my control now. Um, but I think I could have, like, for me, I really could have only done that after having like gotten that out of my system.
Oh yeah, mine came a year and a half. I remember just one day crying really hard, and I don't know why I was crying. I was crying. Like it was just, I think it all hit it. I had my dad had died during that time. There's a lot of layers to it, but it was the day where I was like, okay, I'm mourning, and then I'm moving on. And I remember that day. I remember it just bawling out of nowhere in the middle of my house. Talk about this for a second, if you would. I guess I have empathy in this area. I feel sorry for people who have been through a divorce, and I'm going to say a woman just because too many times a woman who may have been a stay-at-home mom is now put in a position of like, wait a minute, I gave up my career, raised my family, and now I go get a job, and so
Hmm.
they're they're not only is their dreams and assumptions all gone, they're just trying to survive. And I feel like sometimes they're in such survival mode they don't get to grieve mode because they they don't even have time for future. They're still dealing with today's bills.
Hmm.
And I like, how do they? Does it take them longer? Do they ever get through it? Can it turn into bitterness really quick? Like, I just feel like that's a separate situation that some people have to go through.
Yeah, that reminds me of the scene from Good Will Hunting when he finally gets to the point where, Robin Williams' character is just saying over and over again, it's not your fault, it's not your fault. And like there's that catharsis that finally comes out.
That's right.
And, some areas of, like there are different schools of thought within psychology where they're trying to define the problem and define the solution. And all of them are sort of right and all of them are sort of wrong. But
Yeah.
one of them has to do with like achieving catharsis, so to speak. And so catharsis is just that, like that what we've been talking about, that deep expression of some kind of emotion that's been kind of stuffed down. And for somebody who is in that situation that you just described, where she's up to her eyeballs and other responsibilities and everything else, you have to ask, like, what is it costing you to keep that down? What is it costing you? Because it's like, oh, I have to pay these bills. Okay, well, there's this other bill that's more important right now. And like coming to terms with like that needs to be addressed before you can address these things very well. There's sort of an order of operations, right? Like think of it like triage, right? You're deciding what things need priority sooner. And like, you can imagine somebody in your life who's just, it's sort of, they're being busy as possible but not really getting anywhere, and you can see it, right? Like constantly cleaning, constantly moving the kids and this and that, and always worried about, oh, I can't stop to do this because then that, and I can't sleep because then the kids will da 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 da. And it's like you're about to kill yourself, actually. Like
Right.
the stress that you're allowing in your life at this point is going to kill you sooner. um and that's another bill that has to be paid. I've thought a lot about this idea of how like everything in the world has a cost, and not understanding what things cost and what the price of things are is an immature state to be in. So a basic example, like I'll put my health coaching hat on here for a moment. Like everything you eat has a cost to it.
Mhm.
There, you can pay by doing the work yourself and making it at home and cleaning up afterward and having a healthy meal, or you can pay by having brain fog and inflammation and, in the guise of it being a meal deal because it's low dollar cost. Like, no, everything has a cost and you need to understand what that is.
Uh, I love that. I'm gonna have to take that and ponder that because I don't like using the word always and never and everything, but I think the word everything fits right there. Everything has a cost. I
Hmm.
think it really does. All your actions, all your relationships, your food, your time. Like I can't imagine anything that doesn't have a cost to it. I'm going to ponder that a little bit. Okay, so let's keep going. We shared memory, future vision, virtue domain. I wrote down here freedom and security. You want to talk about that? I may be putting different words around your different levels, or you can go into any order you want. But let's hit all of them. What's another one?
Yeah. So a certain kind of freedom. There's a huge misconception, of course, in our popular culture that once that's like the ball and chain is probably the worst analogy you could possibly give to a marriage, because it's supposed to be the opposite. It's literally supposed to be the opposite, where it's a thing in life which propels you toward more of who you are, not detracts from it. When the relationship is working properly, that's a mutual building up of one another, right? A mutual edification. Think of
Yeah.
like edifice on a building to build up. And we think like, oh, well, what's that song? Like, should I get married or stay single and stay free? Some country song. Like, I mean, I get it, right? Like, you have, again, going back to cost, there's always a trade off to things. But the idea of freedom here is like, for example, for me, so imagine a pie chart, and a pie chart that describes all of the things that go through my head in a certain day that I'm concerned about. And, for being in the single stage, how much of that bandwidth was given to like, oh, what do I need to do to sort of self improve, to find somebody to like satisfy this desire that God did give me. But then, like, once you have that human in your life, there's a certain bandwidth that is now freed up for you now to go and think of other things. I also like this idea of activation energy to do stuff. So what do I mean by that? So a very simple example, if you live alone versus living with a roommate, your sort of activation energy to go and clean up after yourself in the kitchen is lower, because then it's like, oh, there's another set of eyeballs on this. I can't afford to just simply procrastinate. There's sort of an extra enzymatic thing here to sort of propel me to do this other thing. And so in a marriage, that can work to both people's advantage. And so if you have a particular project that you've been working on, and you're having a hard time sort of like, with homework, it's always getting started that's the hardest part. But with another human being bearing witness to what you're up to, the activation energy required for you to go out and do it, like if you're working out with a group versus working out alone, for a lot of people, knowing that group's waiting on you at a certain time and place reduces the amount of sort of cognitive load of activation energy it requires to do it. Yep. And so you can imagine how that actually contributes to your freedom, because the thing that you actually want to do that's on the other side of making the harder decision becomes easier to do. And so not having that helpful witness in your life is a thing that can be really tough to have to
do. The way I word this is the best thing about being single is I can do whatever I want when I want. The worst thing about being single is I can do whatever I want when I want.
Yeah,
it's exactly what you're talking about. It feels like freedom. It feels like freedom to do whatever you want. I'm like, no, it's horrible, because then I can go do whatever I want. I'd love somebody to say, hey, let's go do this, or remember our goal together. That's our priority, and we're going to put that filter on before we make any decisions. And especially for a man, like I'll give you an example. One of my friends, she's female, and her personality mixed with a little bit of statistics, she would just say it's not as safe for a woman to travel as a man, and so she doesn't travel as much as me. And where I go to a gas station, I get out and pump gas. I don't think about who's out here, who's out there, and they wait for them to leave before I pump. Like most women have to, or at least feel like they have to consider. But yeah, as a man, if we have a good job and we're single, we're our own worst enemy sometimes. And I've been in a couple of relationships since my marriage, and I'm most happy when I have those restraints on. I don't know, there's another way. We're guys here talking, but I'm being honest. Like, it's having a person in my life grounds me in a way that I'm not grounded when I'm left to my own devices.
Right. Yeah. We take for granted our need for curation. So we are much more satisfied when we're given 3 options, and then we make one of those options than given 300 options. Right. And then a great way of, I've heard, I think it was from Jordan Peterson who said this. He was like, oh, you think freedom is like complete unboundedness and no boundaries at all? You think that's freedom? Okay, cool. Let's play a game. Your turn.
Right.
Like you do anything.
Well,
you can do anything. There are no rules.
That's right. Yeah. That's 100% right. No, that's a great analogy. Okay. So I wrote down freedom and security. So I guess they both sort of go together, right? The safety of a relationship is broken. That's another way to put it, right? And so you're living out on you now realize you're living on the high wire all alone, and that is not an easy pill to swallow, especially for different personality types. There's certain personality types that may crave that, and there's others who it crushes, I would imagine. I have one where I thought I was going to enjoy it more than I was. I thought I was. Now that I'm further down the road, I realize, yeah, this is not good for me. Not good for me to be now. When I read Genesis, I'm like, yeah, it's not good for Adam to be alone. And I'm like, yeah, I agree.
Yeah, and that kind of tees up another one of these areas. I don't know if this word exactly is in the dictionary, but I think it works. So the word is neededness. Neededness. You need to be needed.
Yeah.
So where are you needed in your life? I've worked with a client in the past who was clinically depressed, and if you've ever been with somebody who's clinically depressed in life, their sense of being needed is zero. Like, where's my worth? Where's my value? It's a shame that we use the word retirement to describe like being done with your work. Like, what's retire mean? Retire is like those airplanes out in the desert that are never flown anymore.
That's right.
That's not like, why is that our objective? Oh, I can't wait for retirement. I'm gonna be put out of service, bro. That's death.
That's right.
Like,
That's right.
we need to be needed by other people. Not like there's a fine line here between being needed and being in a codependent relationship, which we can talk
Right.
about more if we want to.
Yep.
But notwithstanding, like, the world needs what you have, and you have wherever you are. There's like, everybody has the proverbial ikigai, right? It's that Japanese word that describes the intersection of what's needed in the world, what you're good at, what you can get paid for, that kind of thing. What you're passionate about. Basically, it's like the intersection of those four things. Everybody has that at some level. And some people can get their need for neededness in a single relationship, and you can understand how that's kind of fragile. And you might say, like, well, my marriage is rock solid. Like, it's this is a domain where I can fully exercise my neededness, and maybe it's not as rock solid as you thought. So where are you relevant anymore after that? Where are you cultivating togetherness after that? And so I think that's why it's so important that when you're starting to kind of rebuild to maybe have another relationship in the future, you have to get really good at being single and having your own life where all of these other things that you were grieving are now being met. And it's like, imagine all of the things that we're talking about. Another one we didn't mention was like half of your social network is gone. Imagine like if all of these things now, you being single, are able to cultivate in your own life, and you have all of that going for you, and would only serve to be amplified by a next relationship, not depended on in the next relationship. Man, you're much better set up. And I would imagine, if you're like me at all, that you didn't necessarily have many of those things ahead of that first relationship.
Well, that's exactly right. Okay. Yeah, you're 100%. I'm going to add something to here, and it's repeating what I said 20 minutes ago, and that is, there is this phenomenon of empty nesting that is eerily the same as divorce, and that is, your common thing is your kids. So it's like, oh, that's our hobby. There's where I get my need from. So even if the husband and wife relationship isn't good, the father kid, the mother kid is good, and it sometimes masks as a healthy relationship until it's gone. And then you look up and you're like, who's this person? Who am I? We don't even have anything in common but those kids, which is why the divorce rate goes high when kids start
Mm-hmm.
graduating. Um, but when they both happen at once, when you lose kids and your divorce, your spouse at the same time, it's a double kick of who are you? Where if that person doesn't need me and they don't need me, then I don't even know if I like what I see in the mirror
Mm-hmm.
anymore. And it's a big it. This is why it cracks me up when I hear people get divorced and they start dating really, really fast, because in their mind, I I want a spouse. I had one. That one didn't work. So let me just go get one that works. And it's
Mm-hmm.
like, oh, what a horrible way to think. Like,
What's the
oh,
common denominator there, buddy? What, like
the
what?
I.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. No, it's very interesting. Like, I love that you're identifying the things, the litmus test, if you will, to see if you're healthy. Because it's not just I got to get over the divorce and I got to get over that person. Everything you're mentioning are little things that you ought to just take a pen to paper on and say, let me look at this. How am I doing here? How am I scoring here? What are the steps? I'm assuming this is what you do in your course, right? You help people through these, identify them and help them through each one. Is that correct?
Yeah, the course follows kind of a hero's journey, if you will, where you kind of start out with, like, you ever see those movies where it's like, yep, that's me. I bet you're wondering how I got myself into this situation. And like, it's no wonder that's a trope in movies, because how many times do we have that moment in life where it's like, what series of decisions did I make in life to lead myself here?
Right.
Had more than one of those in the military. You're just
Right.
like, some of the training that we did in Fort Benning, where we would be out doing land nav or something, and then it would just be pouring rain, and you're hungry and you're tired and you're away from civilization while your friends are watching the football game back on the campus. And you just have that moment where it's like, oh, what have I done?
I said yes to
But
what, Lid?
yeah, but those always make the best memories. Like, but another thing that what you mentioned before about like the empty nesting phenomena is, it reminds me of like a survival axiom, if you will, which is one is none, two is one. So the idea there is, how can I build redundancy? Like, imagine somebody who's doing a hike on the PCT, who's going for a very long time.
Mhm.
And so the idea is like, I need to optimize between weight on my pack and functionality of my tools.
Mhm.
So can I have one tool that does more than one job? Or what's my backup in case my light goes out? Do I have a second light? And so it's sort of a fact of life that your first one is probably going to go away or fail at some point. Like, speaking of movie tropes, there's the first Iron Man, right? His like better suit died or crashed or whatever, and so he had to go back to the original one. Like, how many times do you see that in hero movies too? Like, oh no, my first plan didn't go accordingly, and now I have to go revert to like back to just me, or like
Right.
some action sequence where it's like both. It's I'm laughing because it's like how many movies do exactly the same thing? Like when both
Yeah.
the villain and the hero are out of ammo, they throw the guns away. It's like okay,
Now we're
fisticuffs.
gonna fight it. Yeah. That's
Yeah,
right.
yeah. So one is none, two is one. What's the practical application of that? Well, when it comes to identity, knowing who you are without that person is so important. So the one is none thing would be, well, we do everything together. Like we go out to eat together all the time. We do all of our activity. Bro, that's a bad idea. Like I'm just gonna say it, that's a bad idea. You need to have your own little thing that's yours that you enjoy, and she
Right.
does too. Um, and
Right.
that's like you need to give each other space to go and do those things. That's very healthy. It's
Yeah.
very healthy because then God forbid if he or she goes away for one reason or another, you still have like all of these things that you can be that are relevant to you that have purpose and meaning beyond it. I think a marriage should not hot take here. I don't think a marriage should be an end of it in itself, where it's like my greatest purpose in life is doing this marriage. Is it? Because you're not going to be married in the kingdom. That's what it says.
Right.
Your marriage should propel your kingdom work, not just be your kingdom work. It should be sort of like the base camp that prepares you to go hike the mountain.
Yeah.
In my view, I think that's a very powerful thing because then the hiking the mountain thing is still going to be there regardless of what sort of happens with the marriage. Um, and I think we can easily flip those things around. And I mean, I had to learn that lesson.
100%. I was, as you're talking here, I was thinking about a story that happened with me and my kids. Is once, I don't think they were all full adults. I think one or two of them were over the age of 18, but I pulled all my kids together and I apologized to them. And I was trying to teach them a life lesson that I had just learned. And it was, I thought I was being a super dad by being at all your practices and all your games. And my friends that would go play golf or whatever, and internally I'd be like, guys, you're out playing golf, like your kid, like what are you doing?
Uh-huh.
And then there's some men that would go jogging during practice, and I was like, dude, like, or during a game or something, And I remember looking down on him, and as I got older, I realized, no, like it's the airplane mask deal. It's like if I'm not healthy, you're not. If I'm not healthy, you're not going to be
Uh-huh.
healthy. And so I was pouring everything into being a good dad, a good husband, and I realized I was neglecting myself, which would have made me a better dad and a better husband. And I had to apologize for it because I was like, don't look at me as a role model. I was not doing a good job, even though I pretended I thought authentically thought I was doing the best for my kids by being everywhere all the time. And I
Uh-huh.
realized what I thought was selfish was actually not selfish. It was actually where I should have been pouring way more energy.
Right, and then it becomes performative, and it can almost be a form of pride. Look how much I'm sacrificing for the children.
100%.
Um, I was just having a conversation yesterday with some friends about how one of the personality domains that special forces, special operations forces, to include like Green Berets, Navy SEALs, the personality traits that they look for or screen for, or sort of childhood background, they found that kids who had like a more tumultuous childhood tended to be better operators. And so I half jokingly said, like, well, what's the implication there for parents?
I'm
um,
going to toughen you up, boy.
if not, maybe not quite boy named Sue situation, but maybe not totally far from it.
Yeah.
Like, hey kid, go get your own whatever. Like, don't do for them what they can do for themselves most of the time.
Yeah, no, luckily for me, I already had that. It was, my dad used to wake us up at 6 in the morning on Saturdays. We're like, why? And he goes, because we're not sleeping in. Like, well, what are we doing? I don't know, but we're not sleeping in. I mean,
Whatever you want, but not sleep.
yeah, you're not going to sleep. Like, get up, do something, find something to do and do it. But you don't get to lay in bed anymore. That was the way I grew up. Um, Okay, so but can you just get a bit more detailed in the course because we were going there and then we got sidetracked. But is that part of what the course is going through and helping people identify issues that are making them unhealthy, preparing them for a healthy self, which will prepare them for a healthy next relationship, right? And then helping them find a new lighthouse, a new vision, because all their old visions are gone. Am I correct there?
Yeah. So we talked earlier about how there are a bunch of different sort of approaches to therapy and in the clinical domain, right? And so I think it's like they're up to 13 now, right? You have the classic psychoanalysis. You've got Carl Rogers, human centered. Blah, blah. I'm not going to get into the details, but again, it's defining what exactly is wrong and how do we fix it? How do we help? As as someone who's just another human and not God. One of the something that's been foundational to me is helping people connect to stories. So it's a very strange thing if you stop to think about why do humans get attracted to stories and why do we get so upset when a story is ruined, right? Star Wars Episode 1, it was so it made so many people mad because it strayed from the story that they were expecting. And so what's the deal with that? Well, it's because I'm going to paraphrase Carl Jung here, where he's like, everyone occupies a myth, and it can be better to know, or it might be good to know what myth you're a part of, because perhaps you're on the road to a tragedy and you'd prefer it not to be. So by understanding it, sort of like when you go to a theme park and you see the "You Are Here" mark, then it's like, oh, okay, now that I know where I am, I know what to do next. So the hero's journey is a pattern that there are several story patterns that are different movies do different ones, but this is sort of like the monomyth, in the words of Joseph Campbell. And so briefly, it's like you have the ordinary world, meaning you can apply this, by the way, over the course of a single day, a season. It's like fractal, right? So it works on a lot of levels. So the ordinary world in this case would be like, okay, I'm in this relationship, it's known territory, I'm in the Shire, right? I haven't it's all sort of safe. Then there's the call to adventure that you initially refuse, which we've actually already been talking about this, right? So this conversation is its own pattern. The call to adventure would be, you're out of that marriage now. And then the refusal is like, no, I'm going to cling to this. Bro, I was separated 18 months before and then she finally took the action. It was like a mercy killing on her part. That was actually a favor that she did for me. Because I had such I was refusing the call, man. I was like, surely, I'm going to hold on to this at all. And there's no sign that this is not a Hosea story for me, right? Where he was called by God to stay with the prostitute. Now maybe some people are called that way, but anyway, for me, it was like, I'm refusing to. And so finally, at last, I accepted the new journey into unknown territory, which is me divorced, right? And among my family, it's very rare. And it's just of all my cousins, of all of my near, no one had been divorced. And so that was the unknown territory that I had to go explore. Then there's the descent into the abyss. And that's when you're deeply grieving, when things all seem upside down, where if you've seen Stranger Things, there's the upside down, right? It's a world that's similar but completely opposite. And so what do you encounter there? Well, you encounter monsters. What's a monster? So this is one of the chapters in the course is describing what's the deal with monsters? Are dragons real? Or a monster is a creature that has a confused identity. Frankenstein's monster is a great example. So it's pieced together by all of these different things that don't quite form a coherent whole. Or a monster can be like a giant, where it's too much of one thing and not enough of another. There's a great podcast by Jonathan Pageau called The Symbolic World, and a book called The Language of Creation, I think, by his brother Matthew Pageau. This is kind of where I'm getting a lot of this, but it's explaining the symbolism in these stories and how they relate to your life. So a monster, how do you fight a monster? Well, there are a couple of different ways, but you can get into it in the chapter if you're interested. But the idea of the monster is it's part of the deal. It's the unknown thing that you don't know how quite to describe. Monsters don't really have an identity. And so that's sort of, you're confronting a reality where the old identity has to go away. So it's confused for a little bit. One of the biggest social ills right now is confused identity, right? I don't know how I relate to things. Going back to purpose and meaning, I don't know what matters to me and how do I matter to other people if I don't know who I am. So encountering that and dealing with it is the encounter with that monster. And you talked a bit about how the ability to speak forth what is happening in your life is a way to start to order things. And that's exactly right. You remember in the book of Revelation, what comes out of Jesus's mouth is a sword.
Yeah.
What's a sword good for? fighting dragons, I'd reckon,
Uh-huh.
right? So
Right.
speech and putting things in order with your speech, whatever that looks like, is the weapon to fight these monsters. And so we get into detail of what that looks like.
Now, this is interesting because there's so many loops here in our conversation because it's sort of like I was feeling empathy for the woman who's so has to go pay bills and she has to go work. I don't have a lot of empathy for the person who goes out and starts dating before they put in this work because it's
Mhm.
like you're not fighting the monster. You're over here you're doing something different while there's a monster in the room and you're not even identifying it. You don't know how to attack it. You're saying I'm numbing, which is another phenomenon of men numb, a little different than women numb, and but there's a lot of numbing, and it can be drugs, it could be sex, it could be pornography, it could be drinking, it could be dating, it could be name your list. But there's probably some evidence of which ones people of different personality types go for. All the while, the monsters over here getting bigger and bigger and bigger
Mhm.
and bigger, and then you take that monster into the next relationship with you if you don't slay him before you get
Right.
there.
Yeah. Yeah. Pain is meant to be felt for the most part.
Yeah.
We can think of exceptions and surgeries, but for the most part, pain is meant to be felt.
Right.
And you have to consider too, if somebody were to demonstrate interest in you romantically, and then you found out like, oh, I was married last week, but we just got a divorce. Like,
Right.
uh, uh,
That's why we have
uh
the 1 year rule, right? It's like, yeah, if somebody's dating you very fast and there's not some, I've heard of a couple of very oddball exceptions, there's something wrong. There's just something wrong. Like, why
mhm,
would you even attempt to do that? And let you don't have your lens on, right? If you feel like I'm fine, the line I always laugh at internally is, well, our relationship's been over for years. We just signed the paperwork recently. I'm like,
mhm,
that's not true. Just not true. I mean, ish. I mean, I
yeah,
guess once again there are a few exceptions, but yeah, when you're finally when it's signed and you've moved on, all these things, all the things you just mentioned are still happening. They're still in the room, and they didn't get fixed while y'all were sleeping on opposite sides of the house.
yeah,
Yeah, totally.
yeah. And it's when when you go from one to another like that, it's a clear sign of codependence, right? Which is um, there's it's sort of a pernicious thing that can slip in very easily. Where the so this idea of codependence is you're outsourcing your sense of self to another person perpetually. So someone who's in serial relationships doesn't have a relationship with themselves,
Mhm.
really, not a healthy one. And so if you only know yourself by being in a relationship with another human, we're misguided. However, if you only know yourself by being in a relationship with God, that's where that belongs. So the drive itself for codependence, if you would, is not bad. It's only bad if it's been found in another human, right? I do want to be codependent on God. That's not a disorder anymore. That's like proper order. That is order, right? I
Right.
find my order in life when I'm codependent on God for everything. When I realize there's not a thing that in the world that I could do if it wasn't a result of my creator planning it that way.
I have a dear friend right now who just recently went through something, and they're really it's them and God right now. And we just said it's just so obvious when you say it because God's just screaming at us. You know, you got to get this right. The what vertical before the horizontal. Like, how do you love other people till you love God? Like, you've got to have that down right, and then
Uh-huh.
it'll permeate this way. But if you start this way, and then they're like, let me get this down, and then everything will be all right here. It's like, no, it doesn't work that way. It's backwards. And so,
Yeah.
what a great time when you're finally crushed. You know, I'll use the word trauma after the divorce. So, what a great time to just nasal gape a little bit, look up, get this right. Ask God to, I actually just pray. This is why part of the reason I have this podcast is like, not everybody has a good wise friend. Not everybody does. And sometimes you have to go extracurricular places to find some wisdom. And, you know, you'd like to think you can always go to your pastor, but here's just the truth. Christians that are listening, they know that most of their pastors never been through a divorce. They just, it's the head tap,
Uh-huh.
and so you've got to go somewhere where you can get some wisdom, and that's why courses like yours, that's why this podcast exists, is people need a place to help them to know what to do next. It's not just survive. Like they don't even know. I have people who are 3, 5, 7, 10 years past their divorce. They're still broken, and I don't like using that word, but they're still broken, and I don't think they want to be broken. They don't even know how to. They're just living. They're existing, and they're
Uh-huh.
not happy, and they know they're not happy, but they don't know what to do.
Yeah, and that's why I structured the course the way I did, and it was almost an extension of the first book I wrote like 4 years ago. Where for me, I really enjoy writing, and making sense of things works for me when I write it down. And then I wrote so much. A buddy of mine was like, "Why don't you publish that?" And so that's what I ended up doing. And so, what I would encourage the listeners here is that this is a season of navigation. Is probably the best way to put it. Like you are navigating something, and there are things that you need to avoid. There are things that you need to go toward, and the map is a story. The map is a story, and understanding how stories work can help you to see, I am here. Here's what to expect. One of the course modules chapters is labeled "They're going to take you," and that this is from the movie scene from Taken. Right? It was when I first saw that scene, I was really confused because at first I was like, "Is the dad in on it? Like, is he? Is that like no? That's not what it meant." It was like, I need to tell my daughter what's about to happen so she can have a little bit of expectation. As bad as it is,
Yeah.
like you can't think of anything worse of a young woman getting kidnapped into human trafficking. But you need to know they're about to take you.
Yeah, I love that. It's in my very first episode. I say I want people to know the landmines that are gonna to avoid stepping on. And how do I know where they are? I've stepped on them.
Mhm.
That's all I know. And
Yeah.
so I want to share them with you. So the guy behind me says, you need to deal with this. You need to deal with this. You need to deal with this. Trust me, don't date. You're going to want to date. Here's all the reasons you want to date. Let's identify it. And then let me just scream to you, don't. Now then, half of you are going to ignore me. So let's talk about that. Now, if you're going to do it, just do it this way. So yeah, it's really interesting. You and I both, we talked about this the other day. We both have divorce courses. This podcast, if you made one, would not be exactly like this. There's just so many different personality types. There's so many people at different places on their journey, and the Lord's smart, and He always puts the right people in the right people's path. So I hope whoever's listening to you today, and you're my first male guest. I always have female guests, or I talk alone. So it's been nice to have a sort of guy talk here. I hope more guys listen because we get statistics on YouTube, but the YouTube is high men, like way high, more than the podcast, which is very interesting. Don't know why, but I hope there's a man here today who like they hear this because we're sort of some of the first ones to say we got it ourselves. That John Wayne, pull up your bootstraps, the lone wolf mentality that we've created here in America, and that's not right. It's not biblical in any way, and men need help. And I love helping. I just wrote a book for men, but the women buy the women's workbook. The men most pretty much don't. I don't know what that is, but I'm screaming if you're listening. Go check out Marcus's course. Like go put in the work because you're doing your future self. If you have kids, you're doing your kids a giant service, and you're doing any spouse that you may enter a new covenant with. You're doing them a giant favor by putting in the work right now. You want to add anything to that, Marcus, before we close out?
Yeah, absolutely. So the final part of the hero's journey, this is how it works. We're doing it in real time here. We're coming to a close. Is that you come back to the ordinary world, but completely different. I think it was T.S. Eliot who says, "At the end of our wanderings will be to come back to where we first started and know it for the first time." Like it
Yeah,
gives me goosebumps even to say that because
I love that.
you get back to where uh, you yeah so the trope is you have the magical elixir that you can now share with the rest of your society, and that's symbolic for your story, right? It's what we're literally doing right now is like we're sharing the elixirs that we each got through having progressed through that. And back to the ordinary world is back to that place where it's like, okay, I have a new vision, I know where I'm going, I have a certain level of maturity now that I know where my dependence is coming from, I have perspective now where things are never as easy as I thought, but now that's okay. I have like maybe you have an unshakable confidence now where like if you've been through that, your set point of what difficult is has been completely remade. So how much more powerful could you be in future situations where others are freaking out and they're going to see you and rely on you for, oh, that's the rock in my life. He or she has been through this thing. And if I'm going, as the friend, let's say, like I'm going through a death of a loved one or whatever it is, like you now are that hero who's finished that journey, who has an elixir to help that person through something that they never thought possible. And so ultimately in this life outside the garden, what else can you hope for? Like that is the Christian walk.
That's my thing. Is I know some answers we will not see to the other side of heaven. God doesn't owe us answers for everything here. But it is nice. It's a blessing when God lets you see that your pain causes good somewhere. And so
Mhm.
I hope for that too. I hope that if there's any good that comes out of my failed marriage and the ripple effect of sin throughout it all is that I can journey with somebody else and either prevent it or walk them through it. And that
Mhm.
gives me a little bit of joy.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and even C.S. Lewis talks about this, how the way that time works, like if God works all things for good, you got to be careful by like just saying that to somebody who's in the thick of it, because it's like that's not really helpful. But let's, from a 10,000 foot view, if that's actually true, if you actually believe that, then none of it ends up being bad. Like time works backwards to make that only good, which is kind of awesome.
No, it's kind of awesome. I literally had dinner with somebody this week and we were talking about that, about my brain. This is a total derail and I should shut up. We should have landed the plane beautifully, but I'm gonna go off for a second.
We got a little bit of turbulence, but we're gonna
Yeah,
we're gonna
we
make it
got
in.
some turbulence before we hit it. But it's just this idea of like injustice on this side of the earth, and then God saying, but it's for good. It's like, well, how can a child be born into this situation and these horrible things happen? And he dies. He may not even go to heaven. And then we're in heaven saying, well, it was all good. It's like, how? And then we just, no matter where our conversation went for 20 minutes, we landed at what the end of Ecclesiastes, we landed at the smartest man on the earth who pondered it all. Trust and obey. Trust and obey. There's your only answer. Just you have a God who's telling you, he shows you how awesome he is. He tells you he's love. He tells you he's just, and he says, trust me and obey me.
Mhm.
And so just the simple ace of spades over all this is like we are called. He calls us into this relationship with him, and we're down here. If you're listening to this, it's because you went through a divorce. You're struggling right now. Or you wouldn't even be taking the time to listen to this. And God's the God of the universe who loves you wants to pour into you, and you are in a hard spot. And you may not be getting out of it through your church. The people who are to your right and your left just may not be able to walk this journey. And maybe Marcus can do that for you. That's my hope. So,
Mhm.
brother, thank you for taking the time today. And I want to ponder some of this because it may have some shoot off episodes for us later. I would really like that.
I love it.
All right,
I
brother.
really appreciate your time today, Todd.
Thank you very much.